This week, we welcome Greg Sullivan, founding partner at CIOSO Global, to discuss why the pace of investments requires better risk management. In the Leadership and Communication segment, boards challenge to embrace cybersecurity oversight, why cybersecurity needs more business-minded leaders, how to build a cybersecurity resume that gets you hired, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. The threat landscape is constantly evolving, making it nearly impossible for security teams to keep up. That's why so many top companies turn to Tynes, a security orchestration and automation platform built by security practitioners for security practitioners. Tynes empowers analysts and engineers to automate their most repetitive, time-consuming tasks. No coding expertise required, just the flexibility to tailor workflows to your team's exact needs. Ready to break free from the limitations of traditional tools? Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tynes. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 388, recorded March 24th, 2025. I'm your host, Matt Alderman. Joining me for this segment are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Matt. How you doing? I'm in March Madness mode now. I mean, football's over, so guess what? It's basketball time. I don't know, man. I think I'm taking Duke. I'm taking Duke all the way.
Yeah, they're looking pretty good. Florida kind of squeaked by. I'm rooting for Tech because Brendan's at Texas Tech, my youngest. So I can see how far they can make that run. We'll see.
Right. Been good so far, though.
Yeah. So great games. Great games. Also joining me for the segment, Mr. Ben Carr. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Matt. Great to see you again on this fine, lovely Monday. Great weather here down in Austin. Should be kicking off a good week.
Yeah, it was great weather. We were in New Orleans this weekend visiting Renee, and it was awesome weather to be down there this weekend.
Cafe Du Monde, Muffalata, like what was good? Anything good?
Yeah, we went to Pat O'Brien's, had to have some hurricanes. So
there you go.
Yeah. Redfish Grill for dinner. Yeah, we had fun. All right, one quick announcement. We'll get into it. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2025 full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place April 28th to May 1st in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2025 and use the code 5U5SecWeekly. I'll be there. Hope to see you there too. Greg Sullivan, former Fortune 100 CIO, CTO, and CEO, is a cybersecurity expert with decades of experience in technology innovation and risk management. His career spans government and private sectors, including 12 years with the Department of Defense and NSA, as well as leadership roles at Carnival Corporation and Global Velocity, where he spearheaded global cybersecurity initiatives. Now leading CIOSO Global, Greg helps businesses of all sizes navigate cybersecurity challenges. Greg, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Well, thanks, Matt. You made me sound pretty old there. So, but I appreciate that. And by the way, I'm not in March Madness. I'm not that big of a college basketball fan, but it's always followed by April Sadness because I am a St. Louis Blues fan. So,
Yes. Well, that's a whole different discussion.
Right.
All right, we're going to talk about risk management, which is one of my favorite topics because I build a product that helps drive risk management decisions. It's also been a big part of my career. And so let's set up the problem statement first, Greg, right? Why should we be thinking about risk management? What are the drivers that need us to think about risk management as a discipline?
Well, most of us are carrying businesses, and business leaders manage risk in all sorts of different ways, but we have pretty common tools and techniques for doing that. It's I first got my education on this when I became global CIO of Carnival, and my boss also had a seat on the Bank of America board. And the first day on the job, he told me, you will not get the same budget that Bank of America gets for cybersecurity. So that's not a starting point for you in this conversation. But his message was real simple. I'm running a business here, and there are certain risks that I'm willing to take. I just need to understand what risks I'm taking and what they represent to me. What happens if, in the case of something bad happening, and how do I recover from it? And we had, from that point forward, a great discussion every time we talked about managing the risk associated with not just cybersecurity, but IT resiliency in the case of a unfortunate cyber attack. So, when you have these conversations in those contexts, they're really not that difficult to have.
Yeah, I think that's the conversation that many CISOs would like to have, right? Is that, hey, we can have a discussion about it. I'm willing to accept some risk. We can transfer some risk. We can buy insurance for risk, right? But let's have a discussion about it, right? I think the frustration is a lot of people get into those conversations and the discussion's not open, right? Like you can't actually prep that. So I think that's a great, I love the way that was set up and that you had that conversation. We're able to have that discussion.
It's just, it's what it is now. What I'm so grateful for is that we have, metrics, tools, and all sorts of capabilities now available to support the conversation. It was one thing to say it should be that kind of conversation. Now we can actually have it. We have more consistent ways to measure risk in cybersecurity. And again, I throw IT resiliency in there all the time because we have to expect a successful attack or we're not planning properly. So it's, and we can associate with each measure of risk we buy down a cost associated with keeping that down. And that makes it a business discussion. And, I'll give you another example about this. One of the things I did was, we all have exceptions to deal with, right? Nothing is perfect. There's always an exception out there. And, in many of the places that I've been at, it was always on either the IT team or the cybersecurity team to approve exceptions. Let's have business leaders approve exceptions, right?
It's the business asking for it.
Yeah.
Right. And let's IT and cybersecurity, the CISO team, help you understand what risk you're taking by doing something or not doing something. And you'd be surprised how many exceptions I had to deal with once we switched to that model.
Yeah, it's transformative.
So Greg, question for you, right? I mean, you were blessed, and in many instances, I was blessed to have a good leadership team around me as a CISO. You had a CEO come to you and say, let's talk about risk, and then help you mature in your ability to articulate risk and discuss risk and really bring you in as a partner. The wall that many CISOs today are running into is when they sit down with the CEO or they sit down with the CFO, the question is, are we secure? Are we compliant? That's what they're getting. They're not getting the buy-in and the motivation to sit down, right? They're not getting blessed with that willingness to partner from a CEO. So what would your recommendation be for CISOs today who are struggling to break that ceiling up to the CEO and up to the board and maybe in front of the CFO to maybe light a fire under that conversation, start the conversation with the CEO, just to show that, we're here, we're knowledge experts in our domain. We can speak the language of risk. And if we're not speaking the language of risk of the culture of this organization, translate it and help me learn the conversation of risk for this particular organization that I'm in.
So, the CEOs typically understand the language of risk, but there are also often people in organizations, especially larger organizations, that speak the language of risk. We had a chief risk officer where I was. And so a good close partnership with that individual, and in the absence of that individual, a self-developed understanding, go get the training you need to be able to speak the language of risk. There's a language, there's a nomenclature, there are metrics, and we'll talk about KRIs instead of KPIs and things like that. And so there's just a ton of tools out there right now. I have we have the data now. We can quantify this in terms of risk. How you guys are probably all CISSPs. You remember the risk math that we had to memorize to take the tests, and how many times did you use it after that? No, I mean, we need to be back to using those kind of measurements. And I just can't emphasize enough. The data is available now. The team tends to be pretty tactical because you give them a job. You give somebody identity and access management, and somebody threat and vulnerability management, and so on, or GRC. And so they have very specific tasks within those. But we have to make sure there's not a gap in the conversation when the CISO or CIO is talking to the board and then turns around and talks to their team. There has to be a consistent conversation across those. And that's the language of risk. I had the good fortune, as I mentioned, of working with someone who was not just well informed, but well educated on this topic and managed risk for the global organization. And they were able to help that individual, and his team was able to help me understand how all of cybersecurity and IT resiliency could be discussed in that context. Mm-hmm. It was wonderful for me. And I had the data to put the metrics in.
Yeah, Greg, we talk a lot about these challenges, right? And Jason brought it up, and Ben as well. It's funny you talk about the old risk equation, because I still see people trying to do it. The first thing they want to do is grab all their vulnerabilities and shove it into a product. And I'm like, no, you don't. No, that's not what you want to do. Like, trust me, that's not what you want to do, because it goes back to that old risk is threat times vulnerability. So the first thing they think they need to do is grab all their threats and vulnerabilities and shove them in, and they get this magic risk number. That's not how you do it, right? And so I think the challenge is a lot of people tend to go that way, where you and I and others know that, no, we need to start moving, because the data does exist, and the data can be quantified, and it can be tied to goals and objectives of the organization. But I wish we were further along than we are, because the numbers we talk about almost every week is, yeah, I'd like 100% to be there, but we're nowhere near 100%. So how do we help people get there, I guess, is my question at the end of that rant, right? Is how do we help CISOs get to the point where they can talk risk management to CFO, CEO, board, etc.?
So, by the way, you guys were talking earlier about the questions you get from executives and CEOs. I forgot to mention, my favorite question from a board member once when I made a presentation in the board meeting was, there was a lot of data, was overwhelming. It could have been scary, depending on how you interpreted it. And their eyes were this big around. And the question was from one of them, so just answer this for me. How well shall I sleep tonight? Now, how do you quantify that?
Right.
So look, I've always complained through my entire career here that the threat actors collaborate much better than the good guys, than the rest of us. And so, Matt, to answer your question, we have to talk to each other, and we have to be willing to share with each other how we do quantify and carry on these discussions. I remember it was early on in my time at Carnival, and I was put in front of the board like in week 3. It was very quick. And I didn't have a lot of data yet and everything. And you guys probably know Ron Green from MasterCard, right?
Yeah.
And I had a connection to Ron, and I reached out to Ron, and I said, Ron, I need help. How do I talk to my board? Now, this was 6-7 years ago, right? We're in a better place for these conversations now. But he just opened up. He said, Greg, let me show you how I talk to my board. And let me show you the metrics that I use, and the stories that I tell, and the trends that I focus on. And this was back when I would say we were incredibly, as an industry, even for a sophisticated organization like MasterCard, immature in the capabilities that we had. I mean, we're so much further along. So, and I just use Ron as an example because he's a great example of it. But we need to talk to each other, and we need to be as effective at working with each other as I always complain that the threat actors are.
Yes.
Yeah, I found that the CISO community is really good. If you reach out to somebody, I mean, more than not, by a far percentage, they're willing to help, right? People are willing to give you information, give you data, give you metrics, and it's a great community. To that point, Greg, what are the things like, if you're very low maturity, as Jason and I have talked before, you're sharing numbers of vulnerabilities, number of threats, like really stuff that the board doesn't care about. What are the metrics that you think really resonate with the board from your perspective that you've had success with? What are the high level, the top 2 or 3 things that you're like, this is where you need to get to?
So the top one is pretty consistently the top one, and you've all seen it. It's the capability maturity model spider diagram. This is where we are, and then let's have a discussion about, where we can be if we do these certain things and we line up investments and timing against those. My favorite part of those discussions, though, is I've seldom presented those to an executive who didn't insist on being measured at 5 in every category.
Yeah.
And so explaining to them that that's not only not possible, you also can't afford it and you don't need it. And it's just human nature. It's interesting, but we have context for conversation now. We have a language we can speak. So that one seems to resonate. Boards pick it up easily. Executives do. And I can tie timing and investment and resources into the movement of those dots over time. And what I like to do is use that well, first of all, where are we now? As you guys know, There's a lot of ways to answer that question. You can self-assess. That's one kind of answer. You can get a moderate level assessment, or you can get, a deep dive. And, if you're making some progress, do a deeper dive. If you're way off base, don't waste your time. You got so much ground to catch up on. Just self-assess and start moving the dots on the spider diagram. But I like to have the discussion around where we belong.
Yeah.
And when is it time to get there? Because you don't get to the same, each one of those outer dots, you don't get there at the same time. And then what resources are required to get there and stay there, because all the tooling we bring in right now, and you can bring in a tool that's this big, and then you need the next feature and the next feature and the next feature. You're spending money every time you add a new capability. And the CEO says, or the CFO says, I thought we already bought that. I said, well, no, you bought the front right tire. Yeah. Now you actually want to go somewhere.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's often that. Go ahead, Matt. Sorry.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's interesting because I just had this conversation with a client of mine, right? They're like, not only do I have to see the cost of the project, but then I need to calculate the cost of the running of that technology post the implementation, right? So it's not just, to your point, Greg, the initial investment. I spend $150,000 and I reduce risk. Well, to maintain that risk reduction, I need a run rate of $100,000 a year to operate that thing, right? And sometimes we forget about that.
You need the care and feeding.
Yeah.
And now I need more people to respond to the noise that it generates, and so it's I'm happy with where we are as an industry. I'll tell you what amazes me more than anything, and I'll let you guys decide what our next topic is, but it's just along these lines, is the pace of investment and innovation in cybersecurity capability. I marvel at. How long have we been talking about this, and how long have we seen investment in it? And it's 25 years now. And there's still billions and billions per year invested in the hundreds and hundreds of startups. And it's just remarkable to me that we're still at it.
We're still at it. Well, almost 4,000 security companies and counting at it.
Wow. It's a very asymmetric fight.
Not all vulnerabilities are the same. A critical vulnerability on a marketing laptop isn't the same risk as a critical vulnerability on a production server accessed by a domain admin missing EDR. Sevco Security shows you these interconnected risks. Sevco centralizes intelligence on all your devices, identities, software, vulnerabilities, and security controls, enriching them with threat intelligence and business context in real time, so your security team has exactly what it needs to effectively prioritize and remediate vulnerabilities based on the unique requirements of your business. Think of it as a to-do list for risks, but less annoying. Find a smarter way to manage exposures. Visit securityweekly.com/Sevco today.
Now, Greg, we talked a lot about the relationships, and we talked about the relationships that you have with your peer group. But talk to us a little bit more about the importance of relationships within your organization, with the other C levels within the organization. Because you talked about getting in front of the board, and some executives don't. They think they're at a 5 maturity rate right out of the gate. My philosophy is leadership is a political game too, and that shouldn't be the first time that leader sees the number. So how are you working with the other leaders to come up with these scores, articulate it, make sure that they're coming in to that board meeting and you have executive buy-in, you have stakeholder buy-in when you're walking in the door, and you may not agree on everything, but at the end of the day, at least you're level setting, you're having the conversations and you agree to disagree, and you can articulate your case if you have to. But those relationships around the organization are extremely important to get to those numbers and get a consensus, aren't they?
So I'll tell you, yes, but there's 2 ways those conversations can happen, and I refer to those as pre-incident and post-incident. So those are very different kind of conversations. But I was very fortunate to have in my last role as CEO who insisted and measured me on not only maintaining those relationships but developing them. And if for no other reason, just good business sense, but when you consider the role that I had, it was so mission critical that they understood. Now, of course, in the beginning of the development of those relationships, I'm very much in listening mode because, there's always a lot of history in IT. There's always a lot of age. There's always a lot of legacy. There's always a lot of need for modernization, but not a lot of budget for it. It's always a complicated discussion, but I could not have been successful in that position without building relationships at the human level with those individuals. And I mentioned pre-incident and post-incident. And one way to get to know people very quickly is during an incident. So if you have
but preferably not.
you're during one of those. But it's they have to build trust. The business pressures, they've got numbers they've got to hit. I always say, look at the compensation. You don't always know everybody's compensation plan, but you always know there's a variable component and it has something to do with this year's numbers.
Yep.
Right? And so how do you balance that against, I want to move that dial on the spidergram, 2 levels of maturity, and I want to do it this year.
Yeah.
And so again, there's a lot other ways to visualize and represent and have these discussions. But when you talk about risk, cybersecurity as in a risk context and maturity in our maturity model context, which are all available today for all of us, business leaders can understand that language. And so it really is a simple conversation. And I was always able to have it in a reasonable way because I got to know the folks. And it's not trust me or you've got to believe me and the one thing I hated is if I had somebody on my team who projected fear. That was the worst possible thing, right? It's just, I just want to have a conversation. And the other thing about building that trust is when that business leader says, I'm willing to take that risk for another year. Okay. then now my job is compensating controls or mitigating measures or things like that. I've got to do other things. Now I know what I have to do to make sure I don't get bit by that vulnerability we didn't patch or something. I mean, that's a dramatic oversimplification, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think a lot of CISOs in the past have struggled with those conversations. No, we have to secure this. No, you don't. If the risk is willing to accept if the business is willing to accept that level of risk, you don't have to fully secure it, but let's try to mitigate it and offset it somewhere as best we can without impacting the business initiative. And that's the conversation we need to be in a position to have now, because that is, to your point, it's all about numbers. That's what CFOs and CEOs and board members, we talk about it all the time. They're driving a business. It's all about dollars and cents for them.
And let's combine that with a mature and well-documented and fluidly operated exception management program. And so we're revisiting those exceptions on a time basis. And this exception I might be able to live with for a year because of the compensating controls, but this one only a quarter, because there's not much I can do about it. I could keep more eyes on it, but I don't want to do that much longer. So, and you have to have not just the risk people, not just the IT people, and not just the cyber people. You got to have the business people in those discussions. Yep. I mentioned before about, having them approve exceptions, but it's that I need them in that conversation,
right,
all along the way. And there has to be a meeting, and we're going to review all the exceptions that apply to this business group right here. And it really, once you formalize all that, and again, there are tools for that as well. I mean, you can do that with a spreadsheet, but there are tools for it. And, and you got to pay attention, and you got to watch the age of exceptions. And I mean, how many times have you found one that lingered that, somebody lost track of? I mean, you can't do that anymore.
And so many CISOs will look at that as a roadblock, right? When an executive says, no, we can't mitigate that risk. We can't handle that risk that you're bringing to the table. We need to push it down the line. I say that's a blessing in disguise, because now what you're doing is you're having the conversation about the risk. You're putting timelines around it. You've articulated it to the rest of the organization, and now you have buy-in. It's a shared responsibility now with the executive team to make sure that you're keeping an eye on it, you're monitoring it, and you're starting to mitigate that risk when the business starts to say we can.
But that's why when we talked about it before, Greg, like that's why this is really transformational if you transfer the acceptance of risk to the business. Again, the business owns the process. Like whatever they're doing, like they own it, right? And there are rare instances where IT or security owns some risk, right? And you do have to sign off on it. But traditionally, what we're doing is highlighting that there's a problem, right? And saying, hey, does everyone understand it? And if you approach it that way of like, I think, and I mentioned your feedback, when you go to the business and say, foundationally, do you understand what you're signing off on? And if their name's on it, they want to understand what they're signing off on it. And at that point, that's the thing that clicks and I think really creates this partnership where they go, yeah, I can't sign off on that because I'm accepting the risk, right? If somebody else is accepting it for them, yeah, they don't care. They'll just sign off on it every time. Yeah, go ahead, Greg, sign off on this. It's awesome.
Okay. No, thanks. There's one more thing. There's one more thing that comes with that, though, and this is the most beautiful thing of all. And that is when we enter the budget cycle for the next fiscal year, that's in the plan.
Absolutely.
We agree to it at that point in time.
That's right.
And so
make friends with audit, make friends with if you have a risk side, make friends with risk, and make friends with the business. All those people come back into the budget play, like you say. It's so smart.
Yeah, my first day on the job as a global CIO at Carnival, I was there about 6 p.m. that night. I was fussing around in my office doing some things. I got a knock on the door. Hi, I'm Charlie from Internal Audit. And that was really his name. And all the other folks said, be careful, and I said, no, I'm going to be proactively engaged with this group, and it really worked out well.
I've had great relationships with audit. If you set that up right, it can be another transformative thing for your program. I mean, you can use them. There's always going to be a little natural friction, but it can be something that kind of moves you forward, and you can kind of work with them to get the right agenda processed.
And this group was good, and they found things I could have never found, and I needed that. I wanted to know how am I going to manage risk effectively if I don't understand it? And
Yeah, especially new on the job, right? You're brand new. It'll take you months, if not years, to figure out where all those bodies are buried, right?
That's right.
People have a tendency to want to keep them buried.
Yes, that is true.
Yeah.
Greg, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Matt, pleasure. Ben, Jason, thank you very much. Thanks for having the conversation. I think this is the most important part, and we just need to keep doing it.
We agree with you 100%. Thank you again.
Welcome.
Imagine a world where every threat, ransomware, supply chain attacks, zero-day exploits is stopped before it can even begin. ThreatLocker makes that world a reality with a zero-trust approach to cybersecurity. By giving you granular control on every executable that can happen in your environment, ThreatLocker protects your business around the clock. No more guessing, no more gaps. Just rock-solid protection that keeps your operations running smoothly and your data secure. Discover how ThreatLocker's least privilege approach can safeguard your organization against known and unknown threats. Take the first step towards total peace of mind. Visit securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker today.
All right, gentlemen, let's get into this week's articles. But first, quick announcement. Identiverse 2025 is returning to Las Vegas, June 3rd to 6th. Hear from 250 plus expert speakers and connect with over 3,000 identity security professionals across 4 days of keynotes, breakout sessions, and deep dives into the latest identity security trends. Plus, take part in hands-on workshops and explore the brand new non-human identity pavilion. Register now and save 25% with code IDV25-SecurityWeekly by visiting securityweekly.com/IDV2025. All right, so some great articles / debates, I guess we'll say, because you guys,
hot yet again, Matt.
you know me by now, Jason. I gotta start this off right. So the first article I pull in here: boards challenged to embrace cybersecurity oversight. You don't say.
Yeah, this was one of those articles that I think was positioned as if we lived in Nirvana, right?
Yes.
Because if you read it, it is the Nirvana scenario that every CISO wishes we had. But the reality is that we've gone through a lot of the statistics, right? First and foremost, when you exclude the Fortune 500, what do you have? Like 33% of organizations that even have a CISO? So, I mean, that was the last number I think we ripped through this podcast, right? Was right around the 30-ish, somewhere, 30, 35, somewhere in there. So, and then you look at smaller businesses, maybe they have a CISO, maybe they outsource. Again, this article was based on Nirvana, and I don't think reality, but sure, we all aspire to have this newfound connection between the board and the CISO, if you even have one.
The stat that sticks out that should actually scare people, for publicly traded companies, the numbers are even higher, because he said only 39% of CISOs report to the board quarterly and 74% at least once a year, with 89% providing a report at least once a year. At least once a year.
But that means 11% aren't even doing it once
at all. But once a year.
Once
like not even quarterly.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like that was exactly what I was going to call out here. Is they talk about the disconnect and challenges for board oversight, but look, unless the board gets more involved and wants to understand it, and we'll talk about. I mean, there's some other articles where I think it continues the theme of this, but it's this whole discussion about we've talked about this. Every business is a technical company right now, right? You're based on technology. You make toilet paper. I don't care.
Exactly.
You still are a technical company because all of your company is based upon some type of technology infrastructure that provides a framework for which you operate and exchange data with other companies. And data is the new currency. If that's true, why aren't you escalating and elevating cyber and technology to a high state within the board for oversight and understanding? Otherwise, what is your business? I'm frustrated by that continuity of what the hell are you doing for your business? Because you don't understand it, obviously.
Yeah, no. Again, this article for me started off with the CISO on the board has this wonderful newfound connection, and then you jump into challenges where, oh, wait a minute, there is no connection. You're not connected. You're not articulating the risk to the business. So I don't know. This was a tough read for me because it was all over the place.
Jason, if you look at those stats, even like 89% at least once a year. Okay, what does that once a year reporting requirement look like? Is it 15 minutes with the CIO who you report to sitting right next to you, kicking you under the table and saying, shut up, don't say that?
Exactly. And what's the content that you're bringing to the table? We talked about this last week. Are you coming in the door talking about how many, spam emails you were able to block and, how many times your EDR went off and alerted? Like, is that what you're talking about in the board meeting? Because if it is, that's why you're only getting 8 minutes.
We had a good year. 73% of people did their security training versus 68% last year. Success.
Exactly.
Oh, we're going to get into that topic again this week too. I agree, right? This article is kind of positioned as nirvana, like this is where we're going, like this is where we are. No, we're not there yet, folks. Like we're just not there. There are some down in the bottom. He does talk a little bit about what you need to do around aligning goals and talking in business terms, but the reality is we're still not there. That's my challenge, right? Is this article looks like, hey, we're there, and we're not there. Folks,
and the unfortunate part is that based on all of the conversations we have week over week, it's not looking like we're making positive traction anymore. It's actually looking like we're backpedaling now. So to be able to talk about this like the future is bright, I'm sorry, but for months now, we've been on this podcast talking about, oh no, it's getting a little bit more scary.
Well, and I think it highlights this article highlights a thing, I guess, even a little more acutely, is that it's almost like it's focused on like, okay, what does the CISO need to do? We talk about this a lot, right? What's the CISO need to do to elevate his game? And I think that's misplaced. I think it needs to be shifted, and that burden needs to go on boards and say, look, if you want the CISO to talk more about business, bring him in as a partner, educate, train, like be more interested. If it's a miss, like figure out what to do outside the boardroom to level up that person or that role.
Yep, 100% agree.
Not replace, just educate, train. Like you can't just expect people to come in. And it's like, I've been in the boardroom, and Jason, I'm sure you've seen this too. You walk in and it's like, I don't even know what you want to see. Like we haven't had any pre-conversation. There's not a discussion. There's no facilitation of like, hey, I'd really like, and if you've been there once or twice, hey, can we improve? Like, how can we work together to get better input and reporting? And that connection just isn't there. And so I think like boards really need to take responsibility for this.
Yeah, I agree. And to be honest with you, the rest of the executive leadership team as well. I told you guys, one of the best relationships in the organization I ever built was with my CFO. My CFO taught me the way when it came to how to report to a board, how to speak to the board, how to speak to the CEO, how to articulate risk the right way, right? And really mentor me up to be able to elevate my level of conversation with the folks who have the purse strings, who are making the strategic decisions. Start there maybe. CISOs that are out there, go build a relationship with the CFO, because guess what? They're reporting to the board at least quarterly, if not more.
At least quarterly. At least. I mean, even as a chief product officer, I'm in our quarterly board meetings, right? Like,
right.
Because they want to know what's going on. Now we're changing the cadence a little bit, but I have more. I'm in more board meetings than the CISOs on average, folks. So just think about that for a second.
Right.
Look, I'm sure in many companies, the damn janitor's in the boardroom more than the CISO.
All right, so let's stay on this board topic for a little bit, because this next article I pull in from Forbes, it's really interesting. It's called the Berkshire Dilemma. Are boards making the same mistakes on AI governance that they made on cybersecurity? And this is about putting an AI governance body in place to look at how AI is going to impact the business. And Berkshire Hathaway doesn't want to do it. They don't want to have this thing, which is kind of where we were in the cybersecurity space years
100%.
ago, right? And so the reason I brought this in is the conversation we just had, right? We don't have cybersecurity being talked about enough at the board, 89% once a year, let alone the impacts of AI on the business either. Like, so what are boards doing?
And at the end of the day, one of the major components that you want to be speaking of when you're having the AI conversation is the risk around the AI itself and the data that you're actually indexing. That's a huge piece of this, right? So, I mean, the article called it out. AI is the biggest commercial opportunity that we're facing in our economy by far at this point. I mean, hello, this is we talk about the train's left the station. Guess what we're going to be building things on? Go to any conference today. Everything's built on AI, whether it really is or not, but it's the future. This is where we're going. And I think there has to be conversations around risk of what AI brings to the organization.
I think you're spot on there, Jason. Like we don't see like a database team on the board.
Right.
We don't see an email team on the board. We don't see those are all fundamental business drivers, right? From a technology standpoint. I don't disagree that AI can be transformational. It's a big part, but it's just a technology thing, right? 100%. Yet the risk is the big concern I would have if I was sitting on the board. And
you want to know what the best pair would be, then? Have your chief product officer and your CISO sitting there in front of you at the board. Here's how we're going to innovate, and here's how we're going to mitigate risk. Boom, done.
Right. Yeah. I remember when I was at RSA and back when I was working on the Archer side, and we were redesigning our messaging, and I remember talking through this, and I'm like, so what's the opposite of risk? It's opportunity. But also, what's the opposite of opportunity? It's risk, right? You have to balance the two. AI creates a humongous opportunity for revenue growth, but it also brings potentially a ton of risk. Got to balance those. And the board should be talking about this. And if they're not yet, you think cybersecurity is going to struggle. Just wait till you see all your data out there in these public AI models.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about it too. Right now, there is... We talk about having the carrot out there or having some type of oversight that's going to be the smack on the back of the head. Right now, there's no regulation around AI.
I know. Why
do you think boards aren't doing anything?
Well, twofold: the regulation side, but also shareholder interest.
Sure.
Right. Like that's on the cyber side too. I don't think shareholders are really focused enough on what could be a very large percentage of risk for the organization, right? And I think until you see either the regulatory pressure be enough or the shareholder involvement be enough to drive that change in behavior, boards aren't going to do it because
what's the stick, Ben? The stick could be we're going to get the pantsuit off of us or fined or be in a regulatory issue, right? So that's the stick at the end of the day, right? If they know they're not going to be compliant, if they know the federal government's going to come after them, they know they're going to be legally in trouble, that's the stick.
Well, and I think if there was a significant event, right? So let's say something on akin of like a Change Healthcare or something, right? Where it was so massive to the industry. But if there was a shareholder lawsuit that resulted in that impact directly to board members because they didn't take due care, right? Then I think you might actually see change. Like that could also be where that stick comes from, but it's got to be something because they just don't see it right now.
You mean like an AI model indexing their entire data estate?
Yeah.
And then somebody breaching that data model.
And I've seen a lot of posts.
It could be insider. It could be the fact that people's healthcare information was open to the entire company, and it becomes a privacy issue. It doesn't have to be a breach.
Right.
Well, I'm sure you guys have seen the post recently on a lot of people being really upset about the fact that their books have been used to train models, right? That's all over LinkedIn. And that's just the very surface of people realizing there's a personal thing, but companies need to realize their data is being used against them in ways they can't even perceive yet.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. There's a huge privacy component to that. For sure. People don't realize it because they don't know what they don't know until they wire these things up. And then it's almost too late. Yeah. All right. Next article. That breach cost how much? How CISOs can talk effectively about a cyber incident's toll, which could also include an AI breach, by the way, folks.
Well, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the big item that came out of this is, cost of breach jumped up 10% from last year.
Yeah.
So We're up to 4.88 million on average.
Yeah, on average.
I've seen numbers as high as like 5.4, but it's still roughly around the same. Yeah, it's all around the 5 million.
Let's
number.
round up or round down. It's about average. 5 million, right? Let's call it about 5.
And by the way, that's the average. So it varies drastically in different industries and different organization sizes. Like I said, we use a historical loss database to do what we do on the risk quant side. So I know the differences, right? I see them in the data sets, right? This is the average loss, right?
Matt, have you looked at, I'm sure that's when you think about the average data loss, right? There's a lot of people on the small tail. Have you seen any of the data that actually would show you where like the sweet spot of actually like enterprise companies land versus, that pulling the number way down?
Yeah, I could find it because when we build our generic risk scenarios out of the box, I think they total roughly 3 and change. Now that's a 10-year look back period. So if I shorten that look back period, those numbers are going to go higher, closer to the 5 million range, right? So that's how accurate I know that the numbers kind of are, is because I see it in our own data sets, right? Now, there is a threshold, and it's typically, above 1,000 employees in certain industries, you're going to start to see things tick up pretty fast, Ben. But I haven't figured out where that crossover point exactly is. I have the data, so we should be able to model it. But I
just think it'd be really interesting to look at the curve of that data and like compare it against numbers, because I think people would be really surprised to see. My suspicion is that number is really skewed by the vast majority of very low value that's
Correct.
Pulling it way down. Whereas if you say like you're over 1,000 employees, that number's got to be massively higher.
Oh, it can get way higher. Yeah. I mean, it's in the tens to hundreds of million. Now, by the way, that's how we calculate as annualized loss expectancy, which is probability, right? Likelihood times impact. Now the impact dollars are higher for sure. So you'll see single loss expectancies well into the 30, 40, $50 million range. But on an annualized basis under an ALE, you look at the probability of that attack, that brings that value down. So it depends on how you measure it, Ben. But yes, you definitely have higher loss expectancies for single events that get kind of brought down through the likelihood part of the equation, which looks at the ALE.
Now, what the article does, though, is point out a huge gap that we have, right? It talks about how there's no universally accepted standard for measuring and predicting. And the big one for me is predicting the risk, right? Because so many times, CFOs, CEOs will be like, all right, we need to be able to predict what our losses would be if a breach were to ever happen. And if the CISO comes in with bad information or, a bad method for measuring it and they're off, guess what? See you later when something happens, right? Goodbye.
The lack of a standard makes it really difficult for CISOs, right? Because then you always get into this thing where the CFO wants to debate you or somebody else wants to debate you about it. And it's like, you're already standing in there trying to build credibility, but then that instant of debate, like it's just really difficult in the boardroom to have that discussion.
But Ben, here's the beauty of the debate. The beauty of the debate is when you have concessions, now it's a group decision. It's not solely on the shoulders of the CISO. Because now when you're having this conversation with an executive team and you're having a debate with the CFO, you come up with a consensus and you build the model together.
Yes.
All in, baby. All in. Now you all own it. That's the beauty of the debate. But the CISO needs to come to the table with the negotiating chips and say, here's how I started.
Yeah, and I think my point to that is, like, I believe, as you said, like when you come into that discussion and somebody wants to debate, be free to say, that's awesome, let's have a discussion.
Exactly it.
Like, let's open it up, right? Like, 100%. As opposed to, I think a lot of CISOs go in their defensive and they're like, no I'm sure this is the way it is, and it's much better to come in and say, hey, let's have it. Let's figure out what is the commonality we want to use.
The Nirvana scenario is where you and an executive team are sitting there building it together. Mm-hmm. That's the Nirvana. That's what we want.
Yeah.
That's what we want. We want that shared responsibility. So in order to have it, skin in the game. Let's go. Let's build it together.
Yeah, and don't go in with an approach of FUD. Don't overinflate. Like, go in with something you can back up and be realistic. But also realize, like, when we talk about that average number of 5 million, like, if they have a great example of Maersk in here, right? Where Maersk had 300 million in system restoration, but the impact to the entire ecosystem was $10 billion, right? So you have to think about that. Has to be part of the discussion, is the larger framework for the impact, not just the individual, because that is going to create additional downstream and partner related concern.
Yeah, the direct cost, which is, hey, I got to get my ass out of this incident. And then all the indirect costs, right? Your insurance premiums are probably going to go up. The reputational damage is going to have an impact. So yeah, all of those things that are
when you're in that size, it's a multi-year impact too, right? It's not the initial, like within 6 months, like what was our cost? It's 2 years down the road. What was the improvements we had to make? What was the cost and reputational damage that we had to, repair? It's all those things that then add up to make a much larger impact.
Yes. They talk a little bit about it in here. I'm not going to harp on it too much. People can find me. It does talk a little about some of the risk management models, right? I'm very familiar with FAIR and the work that Jeff did.
Monte Carlo.
Right. In FAIR actually runs you through a Monte Carlo simulation. They take loss event frequency and loss magnitude and the nodes under it. My challenge with FAIR is it's a little complex for the lay person. You've got to be pretty mature in your risk methodologies. You can use a simple NIST 830 model, which is a straight line, single loss expectancy times threat event frequency calculation. It will get you in the ballpark to have these conversations. And then what you do is you tweak your bands, right? This is what PwC, Deloitte, and all these guys do. They come in, they build these different thresholds for you. They set the boundaries. You build that out as a custom framework. You put the numbers in and you let the numbers speak for themselves. And you use it consistently to start to communicate the potential risks the business has across these different scenarios. It's not rocket science, guys. The models are there. It's just I don't think most are familiar with how to do risk management 101, and that's part of our challenge.
Right. Yeah.
Why cybersecurity needs more business-minded leaders? Because they need to talk about risk.
Yes, because of everything we just got done talking about. Everything we talk about on this show every single week.
Now, they make a statement. The question is no longer, are we compliant, but are we truly resilient? No, we're not asking that question yet. That's what we aspire to be asking.
Haven't even gotten there yet.
We're not there yet, people. I'm just telling you, article number 1, we're not there.
I love his epiphany. Along the way, I saw a pattern. Cybersecurity was often treated as an afterthought. Wow, how long did it take you to get to that epiphany? It's just the state of the state. It's the way it is, and that's the problem. It's an afterthought.
Yeah, 100%.
Yep.
I mean, one of the statements that they put in there is, they said, that's why more cybersecurity executives are emerging from finance, law, corporate strategy, and all these other places, right? I mean, listen, at the end of it, it's about the attitude and the aptitude, right? And it's about grooming good leaders within your organization. I agree. It doesn't necessarily have to come from cyber. Right? It doesn't necessarily have to come from IT. I totally agree with that. But what I will say is that if you can groom good leaders up through the ranks and build them into good executives, that's talent and knowledge that they bring to the table on top of the good executive leadership skills, right?
Yes. So, yeah. It is. This is the transition, and we're not there. Nope. Some are going to make the transition, some aren't. And then we're going to look for other leaders to fill those gaps for those that can't. It's okay. It's evolution of the industry.
Totally, 100%. And I obviously have concerns when you say, "All right, let's bring in someone through the legal ranks." Okay, fine. We're going to build a security program based on law and compliance. Check. Yep. We don't want that either, right? So it's got to be the right attitude, the right aptitude. And again, that compliance should be a byproduct of one killer cybersecurity program, not because you know how to put checks in a box.
Yep. These are all related articles. Not all cuts are equal. Security budget choices disproportionately impact risk, if I can speak today. Now, this is interesting. They break down where people made cuts and then looked at the result in the breach, and then they break down the 3. Yeah. Now, I tend to agree with 2 of the 3. The third one I don't agree with. So basically they go and they say, look, if you postpone your technology upgrades, that will lead to potentially a higher success of breach. So the cut may not be worth the risk. Scaled back or eliminated security training, I don't think it matters. I think you could cut that 100% and you're still at 45%. We have not moved the needle on security awareness and training, folks, in 15 plus years. You could spend all your money there or none of your money there, and I don't think it really moves the needle. But
I looked at that from two different perspectives, though, right? One of them is enabling the user base to get them knowledge. The other one is making sure that your security team is up to speed with modern security best practices. That I can see have a big impact.
Agreed.
And that's often the first thing that gets cut in the budget.
Exactly
is security team training.
Right. So I think that should have been split into two different training components. One is your end user training. The other is your actual security team skill set.
Yep. And to that point, like, I don't know whether it's the reduced security solutions or technology upgrades, but like somewhere there needs to be a split also in like hygiene, right? So I see a lot of people, they're more than willing to cut out the boring stuff, as we like to, the hygiene stuff, the vulnerability management, the basic GRC stuff, right? But they'll put money into this newfangled like AI, whiz bang security tool that, the cost versus return value just isn't there,
you're adopting
right?
5% of.
Like let's focus on the sexy and like forget the stuff that actually keeps us safe, right? I don't get that.
But the one that stuck out was failed to support a business initiative. Back to all of our previous articles, why they need to be business leaders, right? There was a huge kind of disconnect in breaches associated with brand new business initiatives that didn't have the security capabilities at the table. That one was very interesting for me.
Yeah. I mean, think of it this way. I mean, you could be building a brand new product for a brand new business line. And if you're not embedding security from the beginning, you're behind the 8 ball as soon as you launch, right? So I can definitely see that having an impact because you're not aligned to some of the most innovative changes that are happening within your business.
Yeah, and this is when
I also question on that one, like if you thought that's probably a lot of that's like AI right now, right? How many? So they have 18% experience due to inadequate budget. I'm just wondering how many people actually know that they've experienced an issue right now due to inadequate budget spend on that item, right? Yeah. I mean, because it's so emergent and the lack of knowledge about it, I think that may actually come up. You may actually see that be higher as time builds.
Sure. Especially in the age of AI.
Yeah, agreed. 100%. It's funny. So some of this came from a Splunk study. And the report reveals a disconnect between CISOs and boards regarding security funding. Yeah, we talked about that like 4 articles ago.
in X amount of times on this podcast over the course of years.
Exactly.
We need graphics that just popped up that said talked about before.
Right.
And how long.
And stamp it with the dates of every podcast we've had.
Oh my gosh. That graphic might get a little busy.
Yeah.
Leading through the storm, how CISOs and teams thrive under pressure.
There's pressure. And there's more coming. There's more coming, baby. I mean, it's, again, things that we've talked about so many times on this show. Number one, obviously, leadership style is huge here, right? I mean, even in the worst of times, the leader is going to be the rock, right? They're going to be the rock for the team, and they have to continue building that resilient, motivated team, no matter what gets thrown at them. I mean, it's a have to have, right? So, some of the items they talked about in here are valid, right? Make sure you continue to the best of your ability, even though your budgets may be getting cut. Figure out ways to upskill your team, right? And continue to build that knowledge set. Maybe lean on vendors that you work with to provide training, and so you don't have to expend money on it. Burnout, I took the proactive address of burnout. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? You have to take a look at yourself first, because if you're not looking at yourself first, you cannot address burnout on your team because you're going to be burnt out. So I think
there's a challenge here in some of this stuff where, look, I see traits in people where they deal with stress really well, like frenetically, but on the same point, that tends to make them not necessarily the most even-keeled person in the world either, right? So you have to figure out how to balance this and get the right mix for the organization and the team that's there. But at the same time, I think you have to be flexible, understand if you're gonna be really good at dealing with the 18 million things you have to deal with, I don't know, maybe you have ADHD and you're not going to be as calm tempered when something happens, but you'll be able to respond to it really well, right? So, I mean, understand that there's a psychology behind this that I think companies have to invest in.
And I think, I think there's a portion of this that could be added to this list that I think is often overlooked, right? I mean, there's a section in here that talks about steadiness, assurance, and poise as a leader. Well, why don't you add vulnerability in there too? Because at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with looking at your team of leaders who report to you and say, I'm freaking worried about this too, guys. Let's do what we need to do to get through this. Let's band together and be a team side by side and bulldoze through this together. There's nothing wrong with showing vulnerability. And to be honest with you, that can be an outlet for you to de-stress a little bit too, because now you're actually communicating where you're stressing out and the team can be there to help you.
Allowing for the vulnerability, right?
Absolutely. 100%.
Especially in a startup environment, folks. Especially in a startup environment. All right, last article quickly. How to build a cybersecurity resume that gets you hired. So all my friends out there looking, you can get the template. All you got to do is I think you can subscribe for free. It's completely free to his newsletter. You can get the resume template, but he does point out some very good things in your resume, and it's really about your experience, right? And how to structure your experiences around problem, solution, impact, or value, right? The same way we talk about stuff on the podcast from a interview perspective, right? What problem were you trying to solve? How did you solve it? What were the results of that? That's what people want to see in your experience section. I think it's so important because we tend not to write our success in our experiences in that format.
It's funny because the second I started to read this article, I started to think about, all right, what are the things that people want to see when they're reviewing your resume? But prior to that, what are the things that are going to get you through the AI bot?
Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's like, they're not the same, right? Like if you look at, if you've been hiring for a while and you look at the resumes you're getting out of the ATS, a lot of those resumes are like, what is this? Like, this isn't people I would hire for. What's the pool look like? I'm not happy with it. Like, and then you actually look at resumes you get from either people industry references, like something to just you happen to find. You're like, wow, this guy has all the right stuff. And you find out it got submitted to the ATS, but never made it through.
Right?
Like it's really, really frustrating on the hiring side how there's a disconnect there and it doesn't match.
Yeah. And I mean, if you go to a lot of different like HR type consultants and try to figure out how to, make your resume better, a lot of them are like, have differentiators in there, maybe throw in an infographic about the timeline. I'm like, the AI bots are going to throw that in the trash the second they see it. It's like, so there's almost two different resumes you have to have. You have to have the one that's going to pass the AI bot muster. And then the one when human eyes hit it is a differentiator.
Yeah, and just for anybody out there who's on the early side of the career and maybe wondering, because like, look, I've had this question in my previous history. I've said like, man, should I pay somebody to do a resume review and like, help me out and tune this up? And I've always come to the assessment that no, it doesn't really work out. I've never had anybody who's actually used it say it was really worth it. I'm interested in your guys' thoughts, but I would advise don't fall into that trap, right? Like this doesn't make sense. Get somebody who you respect to review it for you.
Yep.
And that should be free. That's a friend doing it as a service, a mentor, but it's not you paying for it and going through any extended commitment to somebody to get it in front of people. That just doesn't work.
Find somebody in your circle who's a seasoned hiring manager or someone who's in HR who goes out there and recruits candidates and can give you some really, really good feedback.
I did it once a long time ago, and it was an interesting exercise, but never really turned into anything. So I don't think it's somebody gave me the service to do it or something like that a long time ago. So I've never done it since because I didn't really see any value out of that. I have given my resume out to people who have asked as a guide, kind of as a template to help people, because I do kind of look for experiences that kind of they're value points, right? They're like,
Yeah.
we did this, we did, right? You kind of list out those achievements.
Sure.
And it's worked for some people. They as they revamped their resumes, they actually kind of got the hits and the interview stuff. So
I mean, before we cut out, this is another option too, right? Have you guys ever used executive recruiting firms? And I've only done it once in my life, and I was successful that one time. I've never done it more than that.
Like a paid for thing?
Like you go to the executive recruiting firm and you get you're part of a list of a whole bunch of executives, and they kind of farm you out. They look to see if they find a right fit. And usually it's the hiring company who pays, not the candidate.
Yeah. So there are a number of executive recruiters in the space, right? That I think we all know the top ones out there. If you're concerned, hit me up. Like I can refer you to a couple, but I think the people that are out there in the space, and we know them, I think that, yes, I've worked with them before, or they've called me. I've never engaged, because I think it's on the same line of the resume services. There are people who are like, hey, pay me $5,000 and I'll farm your resume out there. Like, they're doing the same thing you are. Don't pay them the $5,000.
Yeah, right.
So it shouldn't cost you as on the I'm looking for a job side. It's often on the hiring side, right?
Exactly.
They're paying for that service, and those are the people that they're engaging, especially on those. The more advanced you get, the more bespoke those services are.
Yeah, they usually ping me because they're looking for a position, right? I've never used those services. I've got a handful that when I have buddies or folks in the industry looking, I send them there. Right.
Yep.
Like, I'll take their resume and I'll send them to all those sources, because they're constantly recruiting for new jobs. So you never know what they're looking for at any given time and how somebody's skill set might align. But I've never paid for that service.
I ask because usually those firms are relationship based.
Oh, yeah.
And that takes AI out of the picture.
Yes.
Agreed.
There's a method to my madness of asking that
There's
question.
no ATS in that, right?
Exactly.
You're not going through anything. It's because they know you, and they have, they either have a reference to you from somebody they know, or they know you and they built up a rapport with you over some years, and then they're saying, hey, I know this guy. I think he'd be a good fit for this specific role.
Exactly.
Agreed. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.